Tupac, who would you say?
Who pulled the trigger? Orlando Anderson, is what I've been told.
He wasn't the trigger man, was he? Have anybody been arrested?
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? It's sentence, not at all. Perez was all involved. They were trying to kill me too.
Suge Knight, in an interview which was released in November of 2020, revealed that Tupac's shooter was not Orlando Anderson, who was a Crip gang member that had long been considered as the main suspect in the unsolved case. Michael Douglas Carlin had carried out the interview, who was the co-author to LAPD detective Russell Poole. Russell Poole was the initial lead detective in the unsolved case of Biggie Smalls. Poole had accused LAPD officers, which he believed were connected to Death Row Records, as being behind the murder of Biggie. Poole had initially accused Suge Knight of being behind the murder of Tupac before his investigation had expanded, and he made claims of the same cops being implicated in both murders. Russell Poole had set up a meeting at the LA County Sheriff's Office on August 19, 2015 to have information which was verified by Suge Knight put forward, where Suge Knight was said to have verified and agreed on that the police were behind both the murders of Tupac and Biggie. Michael Douglas Carlin had the information verified by Suge Knight through Suge's lawyer Thaddeus Culpepper, with the verified information then being passed on to an assistant district attorney who is assisting Russell Poole with investigating the information of police involvement. The information, if accepted into a court of law, was going to be proposed to Suge Knight to come forward with his verification to then be used as a bargaining chip in an early release of his 28-year prison sentence from his 2015 murder case. Russell Poole, while presenting the information verified by Suge Knight of cops being implicated in the murders of Tupac and Biggie, had dropped dead in the LA County Sheriff's Office, bringing an end to the investigation. Suge Knight had carried out a prison interview with Russell Poole's co-author Michael Douglas Carlin, which was released in November of 2020, where he'd went on to publicly speak on the claims which he had verified in 2015 to Russell Poole. He claimed Orlando Anderson was not the shooter of Tupac, removing the Crips' responsibility from the shooting, and named former LAPD cop Rafael Perez as allegedly being involved, claiming that they were trying to kill him too. He went on to claim in the interview that the same circle of people were behind both of the murders of Tupac and Biggie, which ties it into the same cop theory. In this video, we're going to put these claims into context by combining Suge Knight's prison interviews and take a look into the alternate theory of Tupac and Biggie, which ties into the US Justice Department and the penal system and the connections it had into Death Row Records. Death Row Records, being infamously symbolized by the logo of the electric chair, has its origin story out of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, being from several incarcerated inmates. Michael Harry O'Harris was serving a 30-plus year prison sentence, being in the Lompoc Federal Prison in California, after being charged in a murder case where he allegedly ordered the murder of his best friend. Harris was known on the street as a large-scale drug trafficker having connections to the Colombian cartels for a man called Mario Ernesto Villabona. Villabona had been the subject of a DEA investigation, being into his ties into the Iran-Contra crack epidemic of the 1980s. The Iran-Contra affair was a political scandal in the United States which had occurred during the 1980s, which resulted in many inner-city kingpins to become rich, being through intelligence connections, which had played a part in funding Death Row Records. The scandal came about following the Boland Amendment of 1984, which was passed by US Congress. This bill removed funding to a militia in Nicaragua called the Contras, who were fighting against the overthrow of a pro-communist group called the Sandinistas. Ronald Reagan's administration had been funding the Contras in fighting against communism until it was discovered that they were violating several laws, which included war crimes and drug trafficking, causing US Congress to then prohibit the funding. This spawned the Iran-Contra affair, where new means of funding were found, such as selling arms to Iran under an arms embargo, and allegations of working with Nicaraguan drug traffickers to import drugs into the United States. The Iran-Contra affair tied rogue intelligence operatives to the drug cartels of Central and South America, to the kingpins of the inner cities of the USA, as birthing the crack epidemic of the 1980s, which can be tied into the upstart of Death Row Records. Harry O was working with Mario Villabona, who was being investigated by the DEA in 1985, being in his ties to the Iran-Contra affair, as it was discovered that Villabona had connections in Washington, D.C. Villabona's intelligence assistance in Washington, D.C. was working in part with supplying Harry O who made millions from drug trafficking to then invest it into the entertainment industry. Harry O had given Denzel Washington his acting start, being in producing a play called Checkmates, which Denzel Washington had starred in. Harry O was locked up in the late 1980s, where the Federal Bureau of Prisons, through the Department of Justice, chose to lock him up with another kingpin who had been tied into the Iran-Contra affair. This kingpin was Freeway Rick Ross. Freeway Rick Ross was a California drug kingpin who was working with Nicaraguan drug trafficker Danilo Blandón. It was revealed in Gary Webb's Dark Alliance expose that Blandón had been a CIA asset under the Iran-Contra affair, who was alleged to have been receiving intelligence assistance in providing Freeway Rick Ross with kilos of drugs. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, through the Department of Justice, made the two Iran-Contra assets cellmates, locking up Harry O and Freeway Rick Ross together in the same cell. Harry O's lawyer was a man called David Kenner, who was known for representing the organized crime groups of New York. Kenner was a part of a fraternity of high-profile attorneys and became the first lawyer to serve as defense counsel on the first ever federal case of the Iran-Contra affair, which had been brought to justice under Operation Polar Cap, with David Kenner getting his client off the case and winning it. Freeway Rick Ross recalls being in the attorney room with Harry O when Kenner would visit, where Harry O and David Kenner formed Godfather Entertainment. This was Harry O's entertainment company, which he was now seeking to find parent companies to fall under it.
At some point, we talked about getting into the entertainment business. Kenner stood off as my guy, watching my back supposedly. And Lydia was also there to represent my percentage of GF Entertainment, which we decided would be the parent company of Death Row. I actually set up GF Entertainment as a parent company and made Death Row a subsidiary. And so there was 100% ownership through my trust.
Harry O claimed to have come up with a parent company called Death Row Records, based on his situation in prison.
Until I brought Death Row into the equation. On paper, as a company, there was no Death Row. I started it because of my situation.
Eazy-E, who is a member of NWA, was said to have been first offered the parent company through Harry O, which is attached to the Crips in Compton. Pat Johnson was a high-profile kingpin in Compton who is affiliated with the Crip Street Gang, who had got in on a deal with Harry O. Harry O and Pat Johnson both shared David Kenner as their attorney, with the connections both tying into the Iran-Contra affair. Harry O brokered a deal with Pat Johnson's money, where Johnson had $1.5 million of drug money on the street, which was awaiting to be invested into the parent company Death Row Records, once people were found to head the company on the street. Southside Compton Crip Keefe D, who is connected to Pat Johnson and had ties into the Colombian cartels, had the information passed to Eazy-E about acquiring Death Row Records. Eazy-E refused the deal as he already had his highly successful record company Ruthless Records, which had the recently broken up multi-platinum rap group NWA. Producer Dr. Dre was a member of this rap group who had made a connection with Suge Knight, who had been working as a bodyguard in the industry and then began managing Dr. Dre's affairs. During this time, with NWA recently disbanding and Dr. Dre leaving the group, he wanted to start a record label called Future Shock Records. Harry O was producing his wife Lydia's album during a time while locked up with Freeway Rick Ross, and Freeway Rick Ross had recommended to him that he get Dr. Dre to produce it. Harry O then reached out to Rams player Ron Brown to contact Suge Knight, as Suge used to play for the Rams. Suge Knight then visited Harry O in prison, where Kenner and Harry O proposed Death Row Records to Suge Knight and Dr. Dre. Suge Knight accepted, and a $1.5 million of Pat Johnson's drug money from the Iran-Contra affair was moved around in Compton, with Keefe D supplying assistance of getting the cash to David Kenner, where the money was then laundered through the company. Suge Knight had to take on David Kenner as a criminal defense attorney and principal business attorney for the label as part of the deal. Harry O had soon received the incorporation paperwork to find out that David Kenner had set up a separate Death Row Records, being split from Godfather Entertainment after they had successfully launched a brand using the money. Suge Knight and David Kenner now had their own Death Row Records company, separate from Harry O. This had been done as part of a distribution deal with Interscope Records, which was a parent company of Warner Music Group.
When they ultimately got ready to sign the deal with Interscope, Kenner, Dre, and Suge suspended my GF Music Death Row, started the fraudulent Death Row, and transferred my assets to the fraudulent company.
Suge Knight, in using Kenner as his legal advisor, had gotten a 50-50 distribution deal with Interscope Records in 1992, with Harry O being cut out of the company to hide the fact that the money was being laundered through the company. Kenner had created a new Death Row Records under Suge Knight's name, which was now in a distribution deal with Interscope Records, owned by Jimmy Iovine and Ted Fields. Interscope Records was in a $20 million joint venture deal with Warner Music Group, with Warner Music Group being in a merger with Time Inc. Time Inc.'s senior executive was once Charles Douglas Jackson, who is a mediator for information between the CIA and the Pentagon. It has been speculated that General Charles Douglas Jackson had been using Time magazine as a way of launching psychological operations.
Time Warner's history is intimately connected with U.S. intelligence. Their vice president was a guy named Charles Douglas Jackson, and he went back and forth between being a CIA architect and had the name head of psychological warfare, and then being head of Time Incorporated, vice president of Time Incorporated. He was running psychological warfare operations through Time Incorporated's magazine.
In the 1990s, Warner Music Group had purchased many record labels, which included the joint venture with Interscope, with them acquiring a 22% share of the domestic music market in America. Lydia Harris, being Harry O's wife, threatened to go public about Harry O's involvement, which would have implicated Interscope and Warner Music Group in the money laundering fiasco, which resulted in a lawsuit between Harry O and Jimmy Iovine being through the situation of the company's founders and the money laundering fiasco. Kenner had met with Harry O in prison to discuss the lawsuit, where Harry O had been offered a can of Sprite. Harry O was hospitalized following the meeting with symptoms of poisoning, and it was the last time he had ever seen David Kenner.
That next day, I got a call. They told me that Mike was in like a wheelchair. I asked Mike, I said, well, Kenner give you anything?
What happened is, I went to the hospital, almost died from something I ingested. And so while I was in the hospital incapacitated, a fraudulent settlement release agreement was made that I never signed, never approved. And there's no one can show you or prove that I have, because I didn't.
Death Row Records' startup is evident in being connected to the Federal Bureau of Prisons and U.S. intelligence, being through the situation of the company's founders and the money laundering fiasco. Author John Potash, who wrote the FBI's War on Tupac, believes that Death Row acted as a U.S. intelligence front company, which would later go on to aid in the murder of Tupac.
More evidence that Death Row Records was a U.S. intelligence front company, and one of their goals was to aid in the murder of Tupac Shakur. Yeah. And of course they had some other goals also, which was partly to end the Bloods versus Crips peace truce.
Death Row, after being formed, was then connected to further intelligence along with police departments, which had caused even more infiltration. Suge Knight had been initially using Blood gang members of the Compton Mob Pyrus to supply his personal security. This was a Blood Pyru set from Compton which had formed in the same neighborhood which Suge Knight had grown up in. Sometime between the Snoop Dogg murder trial from 1993 and 1994, Suge Knight had changed the label's security into hiring cops. This was achieved through Reggie Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. was a former Compton cop whose father was the head of Compton's gang division. Reggie Wright Jr. was loaned $300,000 to start Rightway's Protective Services, which began supplying police protection for the label. Reggie Wright Jr.'s origins with the label has had many different stories put forward depending on who's asked. One includes the Mob Compton Pyrus, as there is a story that Suge Knight's former head of his gang security, being a man called Mob James, had planned to hold Suge Knight hostage for ransom. Word of the plot spread throughout the Bloods and had gotten to Reggie Wright Sr., being the head of Compton's gang division, who then warned Suge Knight of the pending threat, which then led to Suge Knight taking on Reggie Wright Jr. as the new head of security who began supplying police protection. Another story comes from the Snoop Dogg murder trial. Snoop Dogg was signed to Death Row Records, who was involved in a murder in 1993, in a case which included his bodyguard and one other. Reggie Wright Jr. was said to have been brought in during this time, so expert witnesses in the form of police officers could be offered if similar cases were to occur with the artists in the future. Kevin Hackey was a former Compton School District police officer who had a relationship with Reggie Wright Jr. Hackey applied for a job with US intelligence, who offered him a promotion to the CIA if he were to first infiltrate Death Row Records working as an informant for the FBI and ATF by posing as a bodyguard. Hackey had then gotten a job at Right Way's Protective Services due to his former police relationship with Reggie Wright Jr., all while working undercover for the FBI and the ATF. A book titled Labyrinth, a detective investigates the murders of Tupac Shakur and Notorious B.I.G., which was written by Randall Sullivan, includes excerpts of an interview carried out between LAPD detective Russell Poole and Kevin Hackey. Hackey had discussed information about what he believed to be true concerning Reggie Wright Jr.'s connection to Death Row Records. Page 157 of the book reads, quote, "He first met Reggie Wright Jr. back in the late 1980s, Hackey recalled, when he was hired by the Compton Unified School District's police force. Reggie was working as a jailer at that time, but joined his father, Reggie Wright Sr., on the Compton PD a short time later. Wright Jr. and his partner, Smokey Burrell, were notorious for ripping off drug dealers, Hackey said, and he believed that's how Reggie and Suge Knight had become involved. It was well known in Compton that Reggie was helping out Suge Knight's homeboys when they had got into trouble," unquote. Therefore, Reggie Wright Jr.'s start with Death Row Records has several different stories behind it, depending on who is questioned about the subject. Reggie Wright Jr. had upward of 25 police officers working under the security service, being from multiple police departments across LA who were working security for the label. Right Way's Protective Services had its permits revoked after it was discovered that the police were being used to serve subpoenas during the Snoop Dogg murder trial. The cops then continued to work without permits. Suge Knight's ex-wife, Sharifa Knight, also had a connection into the cops, with this connection being into the notorious LAPD Rampart division. Sharifa Knight had met Rampart cop Kevin Gaines in 1993. Gaines was a part of the Crash Unit, which stood for the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. This unit was formed for gangs of South Central LA, which ended up being disbanded in the year of 2000. From how corrupt the unit had become. The Rampart scandal of the late 90s, which included the Crash Unit, revealed cops were giving out playing cards to each other as trophies for wounding and killing gang members, with a red card symbolizing a wounding and black cards symbolizing killings. This card system was incorporated into their logo, which the cops had tattooed amongst each other to display who was part of the club. They had been involved in framing people, stealing drugs from evidence lockers, lying in court, and many other forms of corruption. Kevin Gaines and Sharifa Knight began dating in secret in 1993. Sharifa Knight was a manager for the label under Nightlife Management and was managing Snoop Dogg. During a phone call with Reggie Wright Jr., Sharifa Knight had revealed that the only paper trail to the Rampart cops had been coming from Snoop Dogg. She claimed Kevin Gaines recruited members of the Crash Unit to work security for Snoop Dogg, which Snoop Dogg would pay for in cash.
Kevin Gaines, did you ever cut him some checks from Death Row Records?
No. I don't even think he's the one that worked. He got his friends to do it. They were paid cash by Snoop.
The Labyrinth book touches on these claims of Kevin Gaines recruiting fellow cops to work security, with page 34 of the book reading, quote, "A number of LAPD officers acknowledged that Gaines had tried to recruit them to work security at death row parties," unquote. This connection between Snoop Dogg and the Rampart cops has come into question regarding Snoop Dogg's 1996 murder acquittal after evidence went missing from the LAPD Pacific Division's evidence locker, which Kevin Gaines had dominion over. The book Chaos Merchants by Russell Poole and Michael Douglas Carlin lists Kevin Gaines as a suspect in the theft of this evidence. David Kenner was representing Snoop Dogg during the trial, and his defense, along with the missing evidence, had beat the case for Snoop Dogg. Suge Knight's financial advisors were David Chesnoff and Steve Steiner, who were under the umbrella of the legal team with David Kenner. Kenner then owned a company called Kentron, which managed the financial accounts of death row employees such as Sharifa Knight, who was a manager under Nightlife Management. Reggie Wright Jr. during the call questioned on if Kenner had been paying the division after they had heard that Kenner was supposed to make some comps to Kevin Gaines. Comps are when work is done without payment, with services or goods being offered instead.
I was with Cantron and them, and they wouldn't have given no check.
I wonder if Kentrock and Kenna was paying. Didn't we hear something about they supposed to do some contract?
Sharifa Knight further claimed in the call that she only remembers cutting one check for Kevin Gaines from her personal account, which was not used and had been cancelled. The transaction was going to be transferred between Kevin Gaines as a payment from Death Row manager Norris Anderson under the umbrella of Nightlife Management. Sharifa claimed the check was discarded as Gaines went on to cancel the transaction with Norris Anderson after telling Sharifa that the cops had no longer needed the money. She had also claimed that the payment would have been below $10,000 as this would have been traceable and how it would have been written for $9,000.
Not unless it was that whole other thing.
Did you ever give Norris the money, or he didn't get it?
No, he took the money back. I said, no, they changed their mind. They don't need it, because I got a call and said, never mind. And it wouldn't have been for 10, because, 10 is traceable. And if he pulled anything, he pulled 9 directly to my personal account.
Another possible aspect of this conspiracy, money laundering.
Deposit the large amounts of cash in amounts of less than $10,000.
What she's talking about is money laundering, or structuring deposits to avoid filling out one of these Internal Revenue Service forms called a currency transaction report.
This shows a connection between Nightlife Management of Death Row Records and the LAPD Rampart division. It may also reveal a connection between Kentron by Kenner and the division, but Sharifa denied these accusations brought up by Reggie. Other cops of the Rampart scandal include David Mack and Rafael Perez. Rafael Perez had exposed the scandal in the late 90s, with him during the time also going on to reveal how he and his partner Nino Durden framed gang member Javier Ovando after they had permanently paralyzed him by shooting him, then planted a gun on him to frame him, which included testifying against him for him to receive a 23-year prison sentence. Rafael Perez and David Mack have been connected to Death Row Records by witnesses who claim to have seen them supplying security. Kevin Hackey's interview conducted by Russell Poole, which is outlined in the Labyrinth book, claims Hackey told Poole that the first time he had ever seen David Mack was while David Mack was allegedly providing security at the 1995 NAACP Image Awards. Artist C-Style, who is affiliated with Snoop Dogg during his time at Death Row, claimed in the 2021 documentary Last Man Standing that he had witnessed David Mack and Rafael Perez several times providing security at Death Row parties.
I've seen David Mack plenty of time.
Who was the other one? Rafael Perez.
Rafael Perez, seen him too.
Joe Cool, who was an artist associated to Death Row Records, claimed too in a documentary that he had seen Rafael Perez both in uniform and out of uniform, along with David Mack, and had seen them interacting with Suge Knight.
Officer Perez, he was friends with Suge. I've seen him up there several times. I seen him in uniform and out of uniform. And then there was another one, the one that they said killed Biggie, right? He used to be up there too.
The LAPD chief Bernard Parks, who was the chief in the 90s, had also claimed or confirmed that David Mack and Rafael Perez worked security for Death Row Records.
We know that David Mack and Rafael Perez both worked security in Death Row Records.
Author John Potash revealed how LAPD detective Russell Poole had asked his superiors as to why so many officers were working within Death Row Records, to which he had gotten the response of, consider them as covert agents.
Los Angeles police officer found dozens and dozens of his fellow police officers at all levels of Death Row Records. When he went to his superiors to ask what were they doing there, they said you can consider them covert agents.
Suge Knight, in a 2017 prison interview carried out for the Fox show Who Shot Biggie and Tupac, had been questioned on Rampart cops David Mack and Rafael Perez. Suge Knight, in a prison interview, claimed he did not know any of the cops and shifted the focus towards Reggie Wright Jr.
The police officer, David Mack.
Never worked for me. At all. Never. I never had a conversation with none of those dudes. Never met those dudes. They never worked for me. They knew Reggie Wright. They didn't know me.
Rightway Security Services has never been proven to have been connected to the Rampart division, although Suge Knight claimed that it was Reggie Wright Jr. who knew the cops during the 2017 prison interview. Reggie claims that Suge Knight had said this as Suge associated any type of cops to Reggie Wright Jr. due to what Rightway's protective services provided. The only proven connection to the Rampart division to Death Row Records was the relationship between Kevin Gaines and Sharifa Knight, which was being carried out in secret from it being an affair. This connection provided Kevin Gaines work through being paid in cash by recruiting his fellow Rampart cops to provide security, being under nightlife management through Sharifa Knight. Suge Knight had found out about the relationship between his wife and a cop in 1996, and while in the back of a car with Sharifa, Suge had threatened Kevin Gaines, and Sharifa then told him that Gaines was a cop to warn Suge Knight not to do anything stupid. This reveals that Suge Knight did not know about Kevin Gaines being a Rampart cop. Jimmy Iovine had also claimed during an interview with Sway that he advised Suge Knight to hire police security to only then find out that they were Rampart cops.
I insisted they get real security, real cops. So next time I go, there's real police. I found that they were Rampart guys.
Suge Knight would later verify information connecting the Rampart division into the unsolved murders of Tupac and Biggie. Tupac was bailed out of prison in October of 1995 with the assistance of David Kenner. David Kenner created an appeal which was approved by a judge, where for a bond of $1.2 million, Tupac would be released from prison and signed to Death Row Records for a 3-album deal. Suge Knight got the $1.2 million from Interscope, which was then used for Tupac's freedom. Tupac then had to have David Kenner as his defense lawyer and entertainment lawyer also. Tupac's family warned Tupac that this was a conflict of interest. With Death Row operating out of California, Tupac from October of 95 to August of 96 had broken the 3 strikes law within California, which would have gone against his appeal and landed him back in prison. Some such as author John Potash and others claim that cops had brought a possession charge against Tupac, which was the final straw, where Reggie Wright Jr. claims it was from his case with the Hughes brothers. David Kenner had one of the cases moved to Las Vegas to circumvent the California law, with Kenner doing this through a Las Vegas business attorney called George Kalisis. Kalisis was a Las Vegas lawyer who was known for defending police officers involved in corruption cases. George Kalisis also knew Suge Knight's financial advisor David Chesnoff, who was also a criminal defense attorney based in Las Vegas. George Kalisis was the business attorney for Club 662. A Death Row business manager was a man by the name of Steve Cantrock, who introduced Suge Knight to New York Colombo mob associate Robert Amira. Amira had been indicted in a Las Vegas case with members of the New York Colombo crime family, but the case had been dismissed. Robert Amira helped with Suge Knight being introduced to Helen Thomas, who was a Las Vegas businesswoman who owned a Vegas nightclub which was formerly known as Botany's. Botany's previous owner had been convicted for skimming money for the Chicago mob from the Stardust Hotel in Vegas. The club was then purchased by Helen Thomas, who was introduced to Suge Knight through Robert Amira, with the club being rebranded as Club 662, which spells out MOB on a keypad, representing Suge Knight's affiliation to the mob Compton Pyrus. 662, oddly enough, was also the Californian penal code for death row inmates. George Kalisis became the business attorney for Club 662, and with Kenner moving one of Tupac's legal cases to Vegas, Kalisis was now responsible for creating an event where Tupac could serve community service. Kalisis chose the night of September 7th, 1996, where he held a charity fundraiser for a Las Vegas Metro police officer called Patrick Barry. The cop owned an organization called Barry's Boxing, with the fundraiser being held on the night of Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Seldon to create awareness for the charity. David Kenner had the circumstances approved by a judge, which included Tupac having to perform at the benefit gig for the Las Vegas Metro cop in order to serve community service. Tupac now had to travel to Las Vegas to serve the community service, otherwise he would have gone back to prison. Page 91 of the book Chaos Merchants by Russell Poole and Michael Douglas Carlin reads, quote, 23 security personnel are gathered and George Kalisis tells them that they cannot carry weapons. Subsequently, Reggie Wright Jr. gathers together security personnel a few hours before everybody goes to Club 662 to tell them that they cannot carry weapons, unquote. Reggie Wright Jr. claims that this was miscommunication between Kalisis and him to the security, as Reggie claims he had told the security only to disarm before entering Club 662, as he already had armed officers providing security.
24 bodyguards that night were told not to carry weapons.
This had caused Tupac's bodyguard Frank Alexander to disarm early, being unarmed while guarding Tupac. His other bodyguard, Michael Moore, had refused to disarm and was taken off of Tupac and was told to go to Club 662 instead.
I had two of the toughest guys for him, and Reggie pulled him off of me. It didn't have to happen.
Kevin Hackey had been requested to work by Reggie Wright Jr., but Hackey was not in Vegas that night and also had Frank Alexander's security radio, which meant that Frank Alexander could not communicate with the security detail. Hackey was also Tupac's connection to bulletproof vests, which Hackey claimed he always made sure Tupac wore when he was with him. Suge Knight and Tupac, along with the bodyguards and an entourage of Blood gang members, went to watch the Mike Tyson fight in the MGM Grand at 8 p.m. Following the fight, one of the Bloods pointed out Keefe D's nephew, a Southside Compton Crip by the name of Orlando Anderson. Orlando Anderson and the Southside Compton Crips were associated to Bad Boy Records, whose main representatives were Biggie and Puffy, with Suge Knight and Tupac having animosity with them from years prior, which had continued to escalate after Tupac had joined Death Row. Tupac ran over and attacked Orlando Anderson, followed by Suge Knight and the Bloods. At 11 p.m, Suge Knight and Tupac were traveling to Club 662 so Tupac could perform his community service. They were stopped and pulled over by Las Vegas cops, who claimed that their radio was too loud. After being released and stopped at a red light on Flamingo Road and Colville Lane, a car carried out a drive-by on Tupac and Suge Knight's BMW, firing 13 times, hitting Tupac 4 times, and grazing Suge Knight's head. Bullet casings reveal that it was a Glock which was used in the shooting. Kevin Hackey went on Fox News in 2007, where he spoke on his beliefs about the murder weapon and how it had gone through the hands of the police, the FBI, and the ATF. Hackey claimed to Fox News that he believes the Glock was the same weapon which was confiscated from Tupac's rap group member called Fatal, which Hackey had then given back to Death Row security. Hackey claimed on the 4th of July 1996, while Tupac was performing at the House of Blues, an off-duty Santa Monica police officer who was working security for the venue had searched Fatal and found a Glock. Napoleon, who was another rap group member of Tupac's group The Outlaws, revealed on his podcast in 2021 how Kevin Hackey had been selling guns to the group and were their connection to bulletproof vests. Napoleon further claimed he believes it could have been part of an operation by the ATF to track the guns.
There was a guy named Hackey. He was an undercover ATF. He was selling us guns so we could keep track of them. Yeah. And also he had a connection to bulletproof vests.
Just watch how this free little device fixes my internet. It makes it so much faster. Okay, look,
These are called ATF gun walking operations, which were exposed with Operation Fast and Furious, where what is called letting guns walk is applied by the ATF, with them providing criminal organizations with guns with the intention of tracking and tracing them. Group member Fatal's Glock was confiscated by the off-duty Santa Monica cop, with Hackey's FBI and ATF handlers then sending Kevin Hackey to collect the gun from the Santa Monica Police Department to have it traced and tracked through the federal database by the ATF.
Go over to Santa Monica Police Department to pick up this firearm.
Hackey says he first showed the handgun to his FBI handlers in 1996.
Hackey claimed after the gun had come back as clean, his intelligence handlers told him to return the gun to Death Row security. He then claimed on Fox News that he believed it was the same Glock which was used to kill Tupac.
A month later in Las Vegas, investigators say it was a .40 Glock handgun that killed Tupac Shakur. Hackey believes the murder weapon was the same gun.
I believe it is.
Compton police claim to have found a Glock in a plant pot within a garden of a girlfriend of a Southside Compton Crip associate called Corey Edwards, with Compton police officer Tim Brennan claiming that it matched casings at the scene, but was then destroyed by the ATF when it was handed over.
This gun shows up. Give it to the ATF agents. They say the gun matched on the murder of Tupac. It was a positive match on the casings.
Orlando Anderson became the main suspect afterwards, being considered as a revenge shooting for the beating which took place 3 hours prior. Suge Knight, in a prison interview released in November of 2020, claimed the shooter was not Orlando Anderson and made claims of Rafael Perez and the Rampart cops allegedly being implicated in the shooting.
Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? It's fantastic. That's not at all. Perez never
trying to kill me too.
Russell Poole's documents, which were declassified on the FBI website, reveal that Kevin Gaines and other officers of the Rampart division were in Las Vegas on a special assignment for the LAPD on the night that Tupac and Suge Knight were shot at. Author John Potash believes Rampart cops killed Tupac and claimed it was the same division of the LAPD which assisted with the Robert Kennedy assassination in the late 60s.
The cops that assassinated Tupac were mostly from the Ramparts division. That's one of 18 Los Angeles police divisions. The Ramparts division was the division found to work with the CIA to assassinate Robert F. Kennedy.
Tupac's brother Mopreme Shakur has revealed in interviews that he feels as if the cops killed Tupac and feels that Orlando Anderson was used as a pawn.
Do you have any ideas as who you think assassinated Pac? Any suspicions about anything at all? Because I know a lot of people have their own theories and so forth. But what is Mopreme Shakur's views on who assassinated Pac?
Cops.
Orlando Anderson, when questioned on the murder, claimed he felt as if he was being used as a scapegoat.
I mean, I've been thinking, maybe I'm a scapegoat or something. I just want to let everybody know, what I'm saying, I didn't do it.
With Orlando Anderson and the Southside Compton Crips being blamed for the murder, a gang war had broken out in Compton between the Bloods and the Crips, which only started after a suspicious murder. Larry Finch was a cop of the Compton School District Police Department, which was Kevin Hackey's former division. Larry's brother, Bobby Finch, who was a bodyguard, was murdered 4 days after the Tupac shooting, on the same day that Tupac had died from his injuries. Bobby Finch was the neighbor to Corey Edwards, who Compton PD had implicated in finding the gun at the property, which was then destroyed by the ATF. Corey Edwards had warned Bobby Finch that the neighborhood was going to get very dangerous from the events which took place in Vegas. Bobby Finch was killed in a drive-by shooting, being shot 13 times in an unsolved murder, with the killer never being identified, with Reggie Wright Sr. becoming the lead investigator of the homicide. Bobby Finch being murdered on Southside Compton Crips territory erupted a gang war between the Southside Compton Crips and the mob Compton Pyrus, as the Bloods were blamed for the murder. Michael Douglas Carlin claimed that he believes cops were implicated in the death of Bobby Finch, to then stage the gang war between the two sets to fit the narrative.
13 rounds, 12 hit Bobby. Maybe they're protected by cops. Maybe he was shot by a cop. And you have Reggie Wright Sr., who is the homicide investigator investigating this murder, and there's never a killer brought to justice.
The Labyrinth book reveals police informant reports of how Suge Knight allegedly delivered a load of AK-47 assault rifles being to Blood gang members in the Nickerson Gardens housing projects in September of 1996, after the gang war had broken out to be used in it. Kevin Hackey had been arrested after he was found to have a trunk full of AK-47s which he had been selling, which gives credence to Napoleon's claims. Hackey had claimed in the 2002 documentary Biggie and Tupac of how he believes he was set up by the intelligence agencies for revealing he had classified FBI documents which revealed that FBI have Tupac's murder on tape, being in private surveillance footage.
Hackey was incarcerated for having a trunk full of AK-47s. Hackey claims he was betrayed by the FBI. He wasn't given the promotion he was promised, and they then let him languish in jail. He had himself just been released from prison.
The MGM Grand tape of Orlando Anderson getting beaten down was made available to the public and spread throughout the media after David Kenner had entered it into evidence for Suge Knight's probation violation case in October of 1996. Suge Knight had been on probation and was able to avoid jail due to his connection to a prosecutor called Lawrence M. Longo, also known as Larry Longo. The CCTV footage spread throughout the media and blew up the Bloods vs. Crip theory and also the East Coast vs. West Coast theory. Suge Knight during this time turned over control of his accounts of $500 million along with his investments to his financial advisors being David Chestnut and Steve Steiner, who were serving on his legal team with David Kenner. Over $13 million were churned out in legal fees going to the law offices of Kenner, being shared between the parties. In Suge Knight's 2020 prison interview, he claimed that an accounting firm who Jimmy Iovine had introduced them to had allegedly stole between $30 to $40 million off of Suge Knight while he was incarcerated, claiming that they were giving Kenner $100,000 a month, which Jimmy Iovine was getting a kickback from.
I had caught the accounting firm who Jimmy introduced us to. They stole $30-40 million. They was giving David $100,000 a month, and David said he was giving Jimmy a kickback from the $100,000 a month.
Suge Knight also claimed that he was not supposed to go to prison for the probation violation, which he had been sentenced to 9 years, but feels as if he was set up by those involved in handling his case.
I never should have went to prison the first time I went to prison. They just played with the thing the way they wanted to play with it. So we was paying him for all the work he did as an attorney, and they was giving him $100,000 a month. That played an effect on me getting a violation when I shouldn't have got a violation.
This came after Kenner had created a conflict of interest between Suge Knight and prosecutor Larry Longo, as Kenner, while preparing Tupac's community service in Vegas, also moved Suge Knight into a Malibu beach house owned by Longo and gave Larry's daughter's tape to Suge Knight, promising her a record deal if Suge Knight were to keep staying out of jail from Longo's assistance. This information had come out during Suge Knight's probation violation hearing, which was seen as bribery from the conflict of interest created by David Kenner, which added towards Suge Knight's guilty sentence in his probation violation case. Suge Knight was sentenced to 9 years in prison, and Reggie Wright Jr. began to run the company for Suge Knight, with Reggie Wright Jr. getting advice from David Kenner. Suge Knight, in a 2020 prison interview with Michael Douglas Carlin, claimed he believes there was a conspiracy against him in 1996, which was to gain control over his company.
All the stuff really comes from because they want the ownership of my company. That's how it happened.
It goes all back to 1996.
Right.
Hey.
March of 1997, being 6 months after Tupac was murdered. His death was seen as revenge for the Tupac murder from the accused Southside Compton Crips' ties to Puffy and Biggie. Russell Poole was the first detective placed to investigate Biggie's death, who began to uncover the Rampart Division's connections into Death Row Records. Poole would then link this connection into the death of Biggie Smalls, which ties into the larger theory that the same people were behind both hits, which then used an East Coast vs West Coast, Bloods vs Crips smokescreen as a cover to hide behind. Suge Knight, in the 2020 prison interview carried out by Russell Poole's co-author, claimed that the same circle of people were involved in both crimes, which ties into this theory.
And the other thing is for Biggie's side, that they saw the first one, they saw the second one, because it's the same people, same circle of people.
Suge Knight had also commented on this in his 2017 interview for the Fox show Who Shot Biggie and Tupac.
Sometimes if you saw the first case, you might have saw the second case, but that never happened, correct?
Yep.
Kevin Gaines was murdered 9 days after Biggie by a fellow cop called Frank Liger. Russell Poole was made aware of the crime and began to investigate it. On the scene of the murder, Poole found the address of Gaines' girlfriend, who lived in the Hollywood Hills, and when arriving is when Poole came to find out that it was Sharifa Knight. When Kevin Gaines' locker was searched, developed photographs of Suge Knight and Tupac were discovered taped to the back of the locker. Russell Poole now became aware of the connection between the Rampart Division and Death Row Records through nightlife management. Poole soon became aware of a lead which connected David Mack to the murder of Biggie Smalls. David Mack robbed the Bank of America on November 6, 1997, using his girlfriend, who was the assistant manager at the bank, to order in $722,000, which arrived just 10 minutes before the robbery took place. David Mack was seen on the bank's CCTV system carrying out the cash in the bags which it had just been delivered in. David Mack was arrested a month later, and when Russell Poole searched his home, he found a black SS Chevy Impala with chrome wheels, which matched the description of the shooter's vehicle in the case of Biggie Smalls. Along with this, Gecko armor-piercing bullets which were used in the murder were also discovered at his home, which were buried under the floorboards of his house. Not only this, but the same weapon type, being a 9mm which was used in the Biggie murder, had also been discovered. Police had also found a very strange occurrence in the garage. Russell Poole had found that David Mack had kept several photos of Tupac Shakur, which he had seemed to have kept sectioned off in a certain area of the garage, which seemed to be kept in a memoriam, which was described by the detectives as a shrine.
In the garage next to where the Impalas parked, he had a shrine to Tupac.
This has been seen as David Mack either being a super fan of Tupac from his believed association to Death Row Records, or a more macabre view of it being a trophy shrine under the LAPD theory. Suge Knight, in the 2018 documentary American Dream, American Nightmare, claimed when he looked Tupac's shooter in the eyes, he looked as if he had gotten himself a trophy.
When I look up, I see the, the fear in his eyes. He got him a trophy.
Russell Poole followed this as a lead, connecting it to the death of Biggie Smalls, and began to investigate the Rampart cops' ties into Biggie's death. Russell Poole's investigative police reports from 2002 were declassified on the FBI website, and although they are redacted, claim LAPD officers were behind the death of Biggie Smalls. David Mack was shown to have taken 2 vacation days off from working at the LAPD, with one day coinciding with the night Biggie was murdered, and the other with the bank robbery. Russell Poole's information was used in a civil trial against the City of Los Angeles and the LAPD for a $500 million wrongful death lawsuit, which named Rafael Perez and David Mack as being involved in the Biggie Smalls murder. Kenneth Boagni was Rafael Perez's cellmate, whose claims were included in the trial as official court documents, and although he refused to take the stand, his claims of what Perez had told him about the Biggie Smalls murder were included as court documents. Rafael Perez had exposed the Rampart scandal after he was arrested for stealing drugs out of the evidence locker in 1998, with detectives believing Perez was going to use the drugs to frame the cop who had killed Kevin Gaines. Rafael Perez made a deal to expose the Rampart scandal for a reduced sentence. Perez implicated up to 70 police officers in corruption in 1999, but never once mentioned Death Row Records or its associates. Perez was convicted to 5 years in prison in 2000, but only served 1 year. Kenneth Boagni was Perez's cellmate for a month and a half, with Boagni claiming Perez, while he was intoxicated on prison liquor, had made statements to him about being involved in the Biggie Smalls murder. Official court documents from Boagni, based on what Perez had allegedly told him, labeled death row lawyers working with ex-cops, including David Mack and Rafael Perez, to set up the hit on not only Biggie Smalls, but also Sean Puffy Combs. Boagni claimed that Perez had told him sometime after Suge Knight was incarcerated in October of 1996, David Mack had allegedly have been given the assignment to take out both Sean Puffy Combs and Biggie Smalls. The court documents claim Perez's cellmate Kenneth Boagni claimed Perez had stated that David Mack allegedly reached out to Amir Muhammad to assist with the hit, who was the godfather of Mack's child and had also have went to school with Mack. While David Mack was in prison, Amir Muhammad had appeared on a visiting list using incorrect details. Amir Muhammad's real name was Harry Billups, who Boagni claimed Perez had stated that he had allegedly become a hitman for hire, being for the Nation of Islam. According to court documents, Perez had allegedly told Boagni that they were paid $250,000 up front, with a remaining $750,000 being paid afterwards, after both Biggie and Puffy were murdered. Boagni claimed Perez had allegedly gone on to explain that Kevin Gaines was supposed to be a part of the hit and cut off both cars, while Mack and Amir then shot up both the vehicles to kill Puffy and Biggie, but Puffy's car ran a red light, which foiled the plan as Gaines failed to intercept the car.
A lot of people don't know that Gaines was seriously involved in this. He was supposed to cut both vehicles off and the other guy come around and shoot him.
This was corroborated by Gene Deal, as he told the driver to run the red light, and also identified Amir Muhammad as wearing a Nation of Islam uniform at the scene of the shooting in the 2002 documentary Biggie and Tupac.
That's him right there.
That's him.
Yeah.
That's him.
That's the guy that came up to me.
The shooter was described as a light-skinned male wearing a suit and bow tie similar to a Nation of Islam uniform. Boagni claimed Perez had mentioned that the additional $750,000 was not given over as the full contract was not complete, which led to David Mack setting up the bank robbery to steal $722,000, claiming he used it to pay Amir Muhammad.
He was supposed to pay a certain amount of money, but they was also supposed to kill Sean Puffy Combs, and they didn't get it done.
The civil trial was dismissed from a lack of evidence against the cops. The theory claims Biggie was taken out to keep up the narrative of an East Coast versus West Coast war, which was being pushed in the media, which Tupac had outlined in one of his last interviews with MTV.
When it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war when you're shooting this to 300 homes, 300 countries, telling them about an East Coast, West Coast war that they would never know exists.
Pushers of this theory claim Biggie's life was taken to put attention on the East Coast, West Coast motive and away from allegedly what really happened.
The exact same tactics were used to kill Biggie Smalls. U.S. intelligence would call collateral damage.
Biggie was killed for no other reason than to advance this theory that the conspirators that had tried to take out Suge Knight were putting forward.
15 had been working with his co-author Michael Douglas Carlin to get information sent to Suge Knight to be verified. Poole had been investigating Suge Knight's 2014 nightclub shooting, where Suge Knight was shot 6 times, with Poole discovering that Suge Knight was set up by an off-duty cop who were providing security for the club, as the CCTV footage showed the cop letting the shooters in to shoot Suge, then driving them off afterwards. Russell Poole also had further information regarding the cop's connection to the Biggie and Tupac cases, which was planned to reopen that connection to the case, which had been closed in 2005. Michael Douglas Carlin had information sent to Suge Knight regarding the subject through Suge Knight's lawyer Thaddeus Culpepper, where Suge Knight then verified the information. Poole had gotten an assistant district attorney on board with investigating the information, which was going to be provided to a court of law, with Suge Knight then going to be offered the chance to cooperate based on the information he verified, to work as reducing his 28-year prison sentence from 2015 if Poole could get the case re-established in court. Russell Poole had a meeting set up at the LA County Sheriff's Office on August 19, 2015, through Lieutenant Kerry Carter, with him going to the County Sheriff's Office as the LAPD refused to cooperate with the investigation. Russell Poole had attended the meeting to put forth the information verified by Suge Knight, which attached former cops to the murders of Tupac and Biggie. Russell Poole dropped dead within the LA County Sheriff's Office while presenting the information to the police. Official Freedom of Information requests have been filed in 2017, which were responded to and signed by LA sheriffs, who claim that the information regarding Russell's death cannot be released by them, as the Monterey Park Police Department is handling the investigation, who would need to be contacted directly. In this video, we took a look into Suge Knight's claims from a prison interview released in 2020, where he attached the unsolved crimes of Tupac and Biggie to the LAPD Rampart scandal. Suge Knight claimed Orlando Anderson was not the shooter of Tupac, and named Rafael Perez as allegedly being involved according to his knowledge. Michael Douglas Carlin states during the interview that Russell Poole had gotten it right before he died, which Suge Knight goes on to agree with.
Russell got it right before he died.
Yeah, he's a good guy. They know who's going on behind all that stuff, you know?
Let me know what your thoughts are on all this in a comment.
Keep Low is the channel. Tap in. Give this video a thumbs up. Big thumbs up to this video. Like, subscribe, and share. Hit the comments so you be comment notified. LASHEIM the God is my name. Don't forget to tap into the channel. Keep Low, you already know. Keep Low, they never tell, they never know. You feel me? Subscribe to the channel. Keep Low, LASHEIM the God. And go to www.keeplowproductions. Check out the page and copy some Keep Low shirts with the world famous lines in the street and the manhole cover. And we down there keeping low. Cause if you keep low, you never tell, they never gonna know. You heard me?